Good morning, everyone. Welcome to iMERSA Day. We're really glad you're all here today. We have a fantastic presentation about photogrammetry that we're going to be talking about and diving deep into the new technology and the techniques that have been developed over more than a couple decades to make animations more realistic. We've got some fantastic panelists, and let me tell you a little bit about iMERSA if you're new. iMERSA is a group that's dedicated to advancing the immersive movement in all different formats, from VR to full dome to themed entertainment to any type of experience where you are surrounded by the environment and placed inside of it rather than just watching something on a screen in front of you. And so today we're going to be diving into that specific aspect of animation and how to visualize things more realistically. So our host today is one of my fellow board members, Julieta Aguilera, who I'd like to introduce to you right now. Julieta has two master's degrees in fine arts. She has a PhD, and she has a passion for data visualization and creating ways of interpreting science visually that really has an impact on the audience's understanding. She's worked at the Adler Planetarium for many years as in the Space Visualization Laboratory, contributing to scientific visualizations for exhibits, planetarium shows. She eventually became the associate director of the laboratory, and she's now in Hawaii, doing continuing her work there. And it's just an honor to have her lead the panel today. So everyone, here's Julieta.
Thank you, Michael. Although you wouldn't know I'm in Hawaii because I'm wearing a sweater.
There
So,
you go.
um, I want to tell you, so in 2016, I worked here in Hawaii at the university with a marine scientist and a computer scientist and a fellow artist teaching a class. And I'm going to try and go into my share screen. So he did for the motion, the structure from motion photogrammetry tools that he used to scan corals. Many of them do not exist today anymore because of bleaching. So he did, this was an inspiration for a summer class that I taught with colleagues that involve kind of 3D printing across media. These are just a few of the slides we presented at SIGGRAPH the following year. So, of course, Hawaii has these 3D structures, like when the lava goes through a forest, it leaves behind these 3D prints of the trees that were there. And we also went to lava tubes, which are, carved by lava. And so we got the students to use their capture shapes to then print them and then put them in VR, so they could navigate, so they could experience objects in these different situations, right? Something you can touch, something that you can resize, something that you can move through. So because I was in charge of the VR part, I asked them to make their models that they had scanned and printed to put them really big in VR, so they could either move through or walk over. And I'm very grateful for my team members at iMERSA for taking this idea of photogrammetry, it emerged from a discussion with fellow artist Carmen Hill from Colombia. And the reason this motivated me to see if we could do this presentation was because today there's all this data that needs to get through to inform human behavior, to address issues that are, planetary, community, and so forth. And here we have a tool that can put data of the place where people live, and people can learn more of the places where they are, and they can see this, they can be immersed in data of actual places and see and learn more things about it. So this was the inspiration of this panel, and I'm very, very grateful for the presenters who jump in. And we're gonna start this presentation with Kachun. I'm gonna stop my share here. We're gonna start this presentation with Kachun Yu, who is an astronomer at the Denver Museum of Nature and Science, and he joined that to visualize the known universe. And he has helped produce movies, create educational programs, and done research on how digital planetariums can effectively teach astronomy. And one of his latest projects involves touring Carlsbad caves in the dome, utilizing photogrammetry data, a project he worked on with Eric. So we're gonna get the deep dive onto this project. Thank you, Kachun.
Okay, thank you very much, Julieta. So I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. And hopefully everyone can see that. So thank you, Julieta, for that wonderful introduction. As she mentioned, I'm an astronomer, so I'm actually not someone who does photogrammetry, although as I'll mention later, it's actually becoming easier and easier to do. And I am not a cave or geology expert, but I am someone who has helped produce live dome programs in our photo theater, the Gates Planetarium at the Denver Museum of Nature and Science. And so I want to describe how we've used photogrammetry to produce compelling content for domes, and what that audience experience was like for the programming that we created. And so this came about actually in the fall of 2021 when we partnered with the National Park Service in the United States, and they were ramping up to promote their Year of Caves and Karsts. And so what we decided to do in our collaboration was to try and recreate the experience of visiting caves for a dome audience. And we chose Carlsbad Caverns, which is in southeastern New Mexico. So it's very accessible in the sense that the Park Service has created trails that people in wheelchairs can access, but it's still about a 2-hour drive from the nearest large airport. So it's not, that easy to get to. And so this made it sort of a great place to do our experiment, to do photogrammetry and put it into the dome. We had a National Park Service ranger and a former ranger and researcher, expert in caves, who actually did the presentations. And this was a very successful series of programs. Now, before I jump into how we actually did this, I just, since I'm the first speaker, I just wanted to give a very quick overview of photogrammetry. Michael mentioned that this has been something that's been important in the last couple of decades, but in fact, if you look at the history, the roots of photogrammetry actually go back to the last half of the 19th century, and that's where the early ideas first fermented. But it really took off with the invention of flight. So with balloon and aircraft pilots, we took pictures of the landscape below them, and these photographs were used to create the first photogrammetric models and to estimate the sizes and scales of landscapes. And photogrammetry really appeared to audiences really by the late 20th century, when it was used in visual effects. And so an example of that is David Fincher's Fight Club, where virtual models in several shots were created with photogrammetry. And so we're seeing a kitchen where thousands of pictures were taken of the set, put into visual effects shots, and you had a virtual camera that could wander throughout this virtual model in places that a real camera couldn't. And so photogrammetry became a really important part of visual effects work. And that leads us to Eric Hansen, who comes from a visual effects background, and you'll learn more about him later on because he's one of the 3 panelists today. But we ended up working with Eric to perform photogrammetry at Carlsbad Cavern. And he took literally thousands of pictures from multiple sites, typically about 1,500 for some of the larger complex scenes, down to a couple hundred for the smaller and simpler geometries. And by taking these multiple pictures, you can reconstruct a 3D mesh, a 3D model from those 3D pictures, from those pictures. And because you're using those real images to texture the models, you have the real color, the real lighting, and the shadows baked into the scene. So you don't have to try and recover that in your shot. Now, in Carlsbad, visitors are actually restricted to a path that winds through the canyon or through the caverns, and you can sort of see I'm highlighting this dim path with my mouse. Hopefully you can see that. But what that means is that because the camera shots were also restricted to that path, the camera couldn't look everywhere. And so if you move through the virtual scene, the scene does break down. And so here's where we can see the backside of these models that Eric has helpfully filled in, but they're not really textured and they're not really correct. But that's one of the aspects of photogrammetry that you have to be aware of. Now, a little bit of background for the caves. For that, we have to actually go back 260 million years to an ancient reef. And unlike the reefs of today, who I have to mention coral reefs, corals exist are not in the form that we know them. So these reefs were formed by sponges and other shell animals. And the reef built up over time where living layers grew on top of the older layers, crushing them below. These dead layers combined with calcium carbonate to form limestone. Over time, ocean sediments filled in to surround the reef. And then the oceans dried up about 20 million years ago, and tectonic forces pushed these formations up above the ground. The surrounding ocean sediments eroded away, and that left you the Guadalupe Mountains, which is that limestone reef, that fossil reef. Now, there are multiple caves that have formed, but instead of water coming from above and eroding the cavities that make up the caves, what happened was that hydrogen sulfide from beneath the earth, below the surface, reacted with water, with the groundwater, and that formed sulfuric acid. And it's actually the sulfuric acid that eroded the caves. And then later on, you had water trickling in that then precipitated out minerals to create the cave formations. So that only happened in the last million years, less than 800,000 years. And then over time, because the water table changed, what happened was if the water table stayed the same for a period of time, you would have sulfuric acid forming from the water that would then excavate out these large level caves. And that's how you have some of the largest cave formations in the world. And one of the ways that you can enter the cave is through this natural entrance, which is which you can take via this paved path via a series of switchbacks. So this is just a picture of that entrance that I found on Wikipedia. But what's great about, again, photogrammetry is that you can reconstruct a scene or a view that's very similar to that photograph, because you're, again, using the actual images that you take to recreate the model. And furthermore, you can explore that model in a way that you cannot in real life. And so what we're able to do is we were actually able to fly up to an alcove in this rock overhang that's about 100 feet above the trail at the bottom. And you can actually see a raptor's nest up here. So that's what these sticks and twigs are inside this little opening. And so this is a place where a bird of prey has made its nest. And this is not something that you would be able to see in real life unless you had climbing harnesses. In the visitor center, there is a model of the caves. Yeah, this is sort of like a tabletop model that's waist high, but one of the things that we can do with the photogrammetric version of this model is actually fly in, and Julieta sort of hinted at this, but the idea that you can actually go in and um, get a sense of a very different scale. So here we've actually shrunk down to the size of that model that we're exploring. And then, of course, we can do that with not this fake model of the caves, but the actual caverns themselves. This is something known as Chinese theater. And again, the visitor and the camera is restricted to a path that's outside of this cavern. But in the model inside the dome, we can fly into this cavern and see this popcorn structure up close. And then what's also really remarkable is that this structure, the opening is only about 4 feet, so about 1.5 meters high. So again, we're seeing something not only that you can't see from the path, but we're also shrinking ourselves to see the detail. This is the big room, which is the largest area inside Carlsbad. It's about eight acres or more than 3 hectares in size. So that's equivalent to about 6 football fields or 6 football pitches. And the ceiling is at a maximum height of about 250 feet or close to 80 meters. And again, visitors are restricted to the path that you see below, but once we created the visualization, we can fly around and visit different aspects of the cave. A lot of the geometry does break up, but because there's so much detail here, the visitor or the audience doesn't necessarily notice that in our live presentations. And instead, we can have them focus on what's immediately ahead of them, such as these ice cream scoop-like features in the far ceiling, which are a result of the gaseous sulfuric acid etching away at the walls. There's also a cavity opening in the ceiling called Spirit World. And this has been noted for decades, ever since European Americans started to explore the cave. And they there wasn't a real easy way to get up there, but the Park Service staff were very innovative. And so they came up with a scheme to use helium balloons to lift a balsa wood frame attached to parachute cords and climbing rope. And they were actually able to get up there. You can actually see the climber as that small figure up against the bottom edge or towards the bottom half of the screen. And so Eric was able to attach a climbing rope, a digital virtual rope to the model. And again, this is a way of telling these stories and having the audience experience what it must have been like to be part of the action. As we're finishing up, I just wanted to show a few more examples of features that we can't normally see. These could be off trail, these could be high up. But again, with the photogrammetric models, you can fly up to see the bacon drapery features, which are caused by lines of water dripping and leaving mineral formations. And finally, this rimstone dam is created by pools of water that again form these rippled storm formations, but in the dome, we can fly right up close to the surface and see some of the mineral formations. So some of the takeaways that we've had from our live events is that what's amazing is that, Eric has a virtual reality app that he's been using photogrammetry to populate models of cultural and natural heritage scenes. And the same workflow that creates the models can result in models with very little modification can be used in our dome as well as in VR. Now, the experience in VR is very different than in domes. So you have a single person exploration in VR with sort of a mass audience tour. But what we find is that you have benefits in both. In VR, you can explore by yourself. but it is very isolating as an individual. And in some ways, it's less immersive just because the field of view of most headsets are typically about 90 degrees, whereas in the dome, we have you can see 180 degrees around you, but you don't have the ability um, to to move around yourself. You're basically seeing a guided tour. Um, but one thing that we have learned through this process is that photogrammetry is getting easier. We hired Eric to do this, and he gave us some amazing visual effects quality results. But there are more and more practitioners who are doing this sort of cultural and natural heritage preservation work. There are phone apps that Ken, one of our other speakers, will be talking about, that you can create photogrammetric models yourself. And what that tells us is that there are rich opportunities for planetariums, for natural history museums, for other institutions who may not have the technical expertise in-house, but they can partner with people who have the expertise and who have the knowledge about these spaces, and they can help you put on events. And so with that, I'm going to stop my share and hand it back off to Julieta, who will introduce us to our next speaker.
Thank you, Gatun. And yes, it's quite incredible that, as our tools evolve, they make us realize more and more about our human existence in the planet, right? Because we usually talk about accessibility, if I may say, accessibility in terms of hearing or looking, but there's also physical accessibility, the places that you just show, people cannot go in. And there are many situations where humans cannot access these places. And especially when we talk about our planetarium community, there are people who live in places that cannot go to places that are right there. So it is, I think it is important we start talking about physical accessibility for, personal or human reasons. So our next presenter is Ken Ackerman, and he is an animator and works in motion graphics at the California Academy of Science, and he has rigged and animated dozens of creatures, including sea otters, birds, fish, skeletons, microscopic plankton, and mammals of land and sea, and also trees. He has also helped develop the look and feel of the motion graphics you see in academic shows, and we are so pleased to have you here today, Ken. Thank you.
Thank you, Julieta. Hi, everyone. Kachun, that was a really interesting talk. I was just commenting about all the delicious terms that are used. Popcorn, bacon, drapery. I'm gonna have to use that one myself. So my talk is a little bit off the cuff, I guess you could say. So I hope it doesn't feel disorganized, but a little bit more like a conversation, I guess. Because I'm going to talk a little bit about just some of the weird ways that we're using photogrammetry. Weird and cool ways, actually. So let me just share my screen here. Well, actually, so a little bit about our team here at the Academy. We've been using photogrammetry for quite a while now, probably at least the last 10 years. And as several people have mentioned, it's changed so much over the years. It used to be quite tedious, I would say, and you had to take all these photos with a decent camera. You had to upload them into the software. You had to have a really powerful computer, and you had to spend. Usually, we'd set it over the weekend and let it run all weekend just to get like the medium point cloud. Now you can do it on your phone, and so. So what I encourage people who are interested to do is there's a couple of apps that I'm going to talk about. The one that I use most is Polycam, but there's also one called Scaniverse, which I think last time I used it, I thought it was free, and it may still be free. I'll have to check on that for you because Polycam is paid. But either way, it's on your phone. You can use it anytime, anywhere. And so I encourage people to develop a photogrammetry habit, is what I would say. Like with me, I'm I'm constantly capturing things that I think are interesting, and then later finding a use for it often. So let me share my screen here, and we can look at some stuff. So here we go. And at some point, I'm gonna run out of time, so I may not be able to show you everything, but we'll just get to it. So the first thing I wanted to talk about is just on Wednesday, I was actually speaking with one of our researchers here at the Academy. His name is Pim Bongartz, and he's leading this effort to do photogrammetry on coral reefs and in several different places around the globe. And they've been doing this for years now, where they go out and they do these transects with highly detailed photogrammetric models of reefs, and they return and do it year after year after year to study the change. And they're also sequencing a lot of the corals that they find there genetically. So let me show you these are some of the scans that he's got. And what he was describing to me on Wednesday is that the way they've been doing it is this sort of transect that's like, I don't know, 15 feet long, where someone has to swim down there and photograph it. But then recently they've expanded their operation. So now they have an autonomous underwater vehicle that is scanning a much larger area while the divers are scanning this area. And so he showed me this huge 10 billion point cloud of this area. I think it was in Tonga. And so anyways, they're doing this is I think this is super cool because they're actually using photogrammetry to do science. Whereas we're usually using it for making movies. So anyhow, this is just a look at some of the stuff that Pim is doing. A lot of these are bleached corals, which he was telling me, it is a sad story. Like year after year, they go back and they're finding more and more of the reefs are getting bleached. But that's another reason why their work is so important. This is a kind of a weird test that we did, my colleague. So a lot of what I'm going to talk about is ways that we are interacting with the collections that we have here at the Academy. We have this huge collection of specimens and other interesting curiosities from the world. And so this is an Edward Muybridge stereographic photo. And we were like, I wonder what would happen if we ran that through Metashape. And so we did. And we actually got some decent results just from 2 photos. I thought that was pretty cool, to take a Muybridge photo and make it 3D. So, and then the other thing, so right now we're working on a show that is about the deep time history of California. And so we look at Ice Age California, which was full of mammoths and saber-toothed cats, and we also look at California during the Cretaceous. So there's a lot of creatures involved in that. And so, sorry, this is a little frenetic. This is just a screen capture. But so what I'm doing as I develop these creatures is I'm actually using photogrammetry quite a bit to help me with that. And we have a bunch of skulls that we've scanned. This is actually an Ice Age lion, North American lion, which is now extinct. And I brought it in with some African lions, and this is actually a tiger right here, so that I can do some comparative anatomy when I'm creating. I don't know if a Ice Age lion is going to make it into the show, but definitely a saber-toothed cat is. So I'm just trying to look at lots of different cats, and you can see I have 4 different saber-toothed skulls in here. And so as I create the model, I'm just trying to, rather than just using one, I'm trying to look at several so I can really try to see the similarities and differences between them and capture it as accurately as possible, I suppose you could say. These 2 are coyote skulls, and this is a Eurasian wolf. Coyote's going to be a major character in this show, so we're working on making a coyote model. And then these are these 2 right here are actually California grizzly bears, which are a subspecies which was hunted to extinction in the 1800s. So, but we have 2 other skulls, which is quite fascinating to me. Some elk and pronghorn, and then so this right here, this is Kitty. Kitty is one of our fully articulated saber-toothed cats that we have actually on display right now. And this model was something that I went into the exhibit on the public floor, and just did photogrammetry through the glass case, and what I got was, you know, this couldn't be used in production for something, but as reference, it's really useful to me, and it's great to be able to, you know, as opposed to just having photos, being able to tumble around these things and really understand their structure in 3 dimensions as you're creating a model or something like that is quite useful. Here's a California condor. Again, sorry about the choppiness of this video, but so this is another specimen from our collections, which is also on display in a different exhibit now. But I was able to do photogrammetry on this because we created this augmented reality condor experience, and I had to model the condor. So I used this to just to help me be able to get up close and see it in detail and understand the structure of the head and the feet. I wasn't too worried about the wings. I can sort of just look at a photo of that to get it, but things where I really wanted to see the detail of the head, and this was quite useful for that. So, and then another just more creature stuff here. This is a scan of a Ice Age bison skeleton, and we have a bison, you know, we're gonna have herds of bison in the show, but we had a model of a modern day bison, and I need to change that into a Ice Age bison, and you can see that one of the major differences is this much bigger hump on their back, and so I used this 3D scan of a real Ice Age bison skeleton to help me rework our current bison model to fit that. And then also the horns are a bit different as well. Ironically, just yesterday we were meeting with one of our paleontologists to go into our collections to look at ammonites, which are extinct cephalopods from the age of the dinosaurs, for our Cretaceous scene. And while he was showing us these, I was like, wait a second, what is this right up here? And it turned out to be Ice Age bison, the top of Ice Age bison heads. And so so I did some photogrammetry on those so I can refine the model even more. But it's really helpful. And then another use of it is with our mammoth. So we're picturing Columbian mammoths in the show. And let me see if I can make this video make any sense to you. This is the model that we've been using for our pre-visualization. It's a model that we got off Turbo Squid. And it was kind of a generic mammoth model, but I think it's a woolly mammoth is what the person who created it was modeling it after. And we've rigged this up and animated some walk cycles and things just to get a feel for it. But as I look at it more and more, I'm like, this is not quite a Columbian mammoth. So I was able to get some photogrammetric models of a real Columbian mammoth skeleton. This is from the La Brea tar pits. And then sketching over it in Blender here using grease pencil, which that's a whole nother thing I'd love to talk about. But I just went through it and sort of analyzed the proportions to get a sense for where our mammoth was in relation to the target. And again, I apologize that this is so choppy, but you can see that the proportions are way off. This is like the head is much bigger here. Like if you were a human standing right here, I feel like the Columbian mammoth would feel much bigger just because of its proportions than this kind of feels smaller to me. So anyhow, it helps inform me how I'm going to go through and reshape that model later on. Okay. The other thing I wanted to speak a bit about is Gaussian splats. So you've probably heard that term. Some of you might know more about it than I do, but again, one of the apps I'm using is Polycam, which you can use right from your phone. You walk around and scan an object, and then it uploads everything to their server and runs it on their computers. So you don't need a super fast computer, and in a matter of minutes, you'll get back the model, and you can process it either as a mesh or as a splat. And when you process it as the splat, you can then bring that into various softwares to turn it, like for example, this is in Blender using a add-on called Point Cloud Visualize. And you can see I haven't been able to figure out how to get it to look hyper realistic the way that it would when you look at it in a dedicated Gaussian splat viewer. But you can see that it creates this very painterly, interesting look, which I think is really quite kind of beautiful in its own way. And this is our a hall of dioramas here at the museum that I just went out and polycammed the whole thing. I've done this several times. You can see it. I didn't get this side very well. It starts to break down. There's usually lots of people too, which kind of makes it hard. But you can see the sort of the painterly quality of this. And so I think we've been experimenting a lot with this, and I think we're gonna find a way to integrate this into our show. This was I was down in LA and I went to the Wax Museum and I was polycamming everything there. So there's the man with no name. And you can see just how sort of strange and bizarre the fall off is around. This is Meg Mucklebones from the movie Legend. Sorry, I thought this was fun. There's Dr. Jones. So yeah, using it for splatting is quite interesting. Okay, looks like I still have a few more minutes, so I wanted to show you a bit of my library in Polycam. This is another thing that's really nice about Polycam is that it organizes, it keeps everything in one place. You can organize it into albums. You can browse other people's albums as well. So these right here are some more artifacts from our collections here at the Academy. This is actually a duck decoy from the Modoc people in Northern California. It's really beautiful. We're actually featuring this in the upcoming show as well, and you can see these beautiful baskets. So it's a really great way, particularly when you have this amazing set of collections here at the museum, to be able to capture them and then utilize them in some of our productions. And then I do a lot of I got this crazy neighbor who goes all out for Halloween, and so I keep polycamming their setup just for fun. It's quite amazing. This is actually like probably 3 weeks before Halloween, and he just kept adding stuff every day until then. So sorry, this one's a little too dense. Oh, this is a splat actually, so you can see the sort of difference with it. Anyhow, sorry, that's chugging. These are some of the ammonites that we captured yesterday that again are helping inform the way that I model these in 3D. These are like 100 million years old. And then just one other idea for anyone who's sort of interested in picking up the habit. It can be used for a lot of other things too. Like this is a diorama that my son made, which I thought was really sweet. But it's also the kind of thing that we don't want to keep around forever. So he and I did a photogrammetric model of it, and now we can keep it forever. So anyhow, that's a bit about what we're using photogrammetry for, and I'm happy to, I'm sorry if I haven't been checking the chat, but I'll answer any questions that anyone has. But at this point, I should probably hand it back to Julieta. So thank you.
Thank you, Ken. Yes. That was quite amazing. And I really like the like you're revisiting the models of the mammals with the underlying structure that you have available with the bone. So, like parsing data, but actual physical data, it's fascinating. So thank you for that. Our next presenter, Eric Hanson, worked with Kachun. So it's a perfect wrap up. And he is the Blue Planet VR founder and has an extensive background in design, architecture, photography, and visual effects, working on major award-winning feature films as leading VFX director at Digital Domain, Sony ImageWorks, DreamQuest Images, and Walt Disney Feature Animation. Eric's award-winning visual effects and design work can be seen in films such as The Day After Tomorrow, Castaway, Fantasia 2000, and The Fifth Element. A passionate explorer, outdoorsman, Native American rock art enthusiast, and expert hang gliding pilot, Eric is a professor at USC School of Cinematic Art in Los Angeles, leading and developing programs centered on film, visual effects, innovative emerging media, animation, film, and virtual reality. So we are so very pleased to have you here, Eric. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Julieta. Well, I think I can shorten my presentation. You did a fine job of skimming over a little bit of what I'll show you. But thanks everybody for being here. Photogrammetry and Gaussian splats is they're big words, and a hell of a way to start a morning or an evening for our European friends online here. But the great thing about this technology is where it can take you. And creatively, I've had a great career, but I'll tell you, this phase that I'm in with photogrammetry has just been one of the most remarkable periods I've had. And I just think it offers tremendous capabilities for all manner of creative endeavors. And so anyway, what I'll show you is a few case studies from some of the projects that I've employed it with. And then I'll tell you about a little bit about resources that I can offer you to help develop these skills yourself. And as Kachun is saying, it has become much more approachable now. We've been involved with it. Greg Downing, my business partner for my first company, we did quite a bit with this, and Greg was an early author of Image Modeler and some early packages. And we've kind of been very closely following the development of it over really probably a decade or two now. And but it's really reached a great point. And of course, there's another big pivot that's coming with it in this use of AI technology and Gaussian splats that I'll also mention. So let me go ahead and share screen. We'll get started here. It's not a whole lot of time. So let's see. I think we're good. And let me know if anything doesn't look correct, but I think this should be fine. So this is a talk that I give a lot in different contexts as a title. But again, one thing that I'm a big believer in, I was a CG artist for years and years doing fictional worlds, and it was fantastic. But I had a big pivot where I kind of decided to look at the real world and use CG to do that. But with the advent of photogrammetry, it was a fantastic method to describe and communicate the wonders of the world. So that's been one kind of guiding thing for me. I don't need to go over this. Julieta kind of covered it, but these are some of the classes. I'm also an educator in the USC Film School. And these are some of the areas. The reason I show this is kind of the area of specialty. Unlike Ken, I do not do character animation. I stay away from character animation with a long pole, as I say, because it's just not my domain. I'm an environments artist. I have a background in architecture, so that's kind of what I practice. As I always say, I try to create the worlds the characters live in, generally. But this is just a little bit of student work. I lead field trips out into the Mojave Desert near Los Angeles, and we use all these capture techniques that, again, photogrammetry and the like, to create these kind of fictional worlds, modification or extensions of nature, and it's quite a lot of fun. Let me move on here, and there we go. And then just a few slides from film projects that I was able to contribute to. Again, environmentally, kind of ran the team to do the cityscape work on Day After and so forth. Castaway was a pivotal film for me. It's a huge effects film. Most people don't know this because actually it is largely CG and it's natural environments. And this is the thing that kind of made me consider how my passion for the outdoors could be the basis of my career. So that began a first company that I made with Greg Downing to kind of try to pioneer some of this capture technique. And we started off with gigapixel imaging, which is just a very high resolution display. And this was, we practiced this quite a bit. We found great opportunity to utilize this resolution for the full dome community and world. That kind of led over into a application of this to VR. So, and this was an early VR, or I'm sorry, full dome film that got a little bit of play here and there. And this was kind of a production test for how we could take our environmental capture techniques and apply them to narrative or just artistic pieces in the dome. And then we went through a phase where we applied a lot of these techniques to different projects that other people were directing. And this is from one of Tom Lucas's films, I think, for ENS years ago, science visualization. This kind of worked its way over into the VR spectrum. We were connected with Jaunt, which was a camera company that had a lot of momentum several years ago in VR, and convinced them to send us around the world to create films on magnificent locations like Machu Picchu. But again, the one thing I'm going to start talking about is the application of this to full dome. Now, this was a VR production, but again, I would love to take, say, the central scene into the dome, which would be pretty straightforward to do. And this is talking about the celestial alignment of Machu Picchu and how it could not exist in any other way. And there's all these kind of resonant things of the sacred Apu or peak of Salcantay that lines up with the Southern Cross. It lines up with the Urubamba River, which mirrors the celestial plane. So, but these are all things that, again, immersive media can kind of best present, whether it's VR or full dome. Now, getting over to photogrammetry. This is actually, I'm not going to give you an academic lecture about it, but it's really kind of a fairly simplistic idea in that as you take two camera positions, and Ken showed this wonderfully with his Muybridge example, that there's common features in several images. And if your shooting methodology or if your shooting style has a methodology, you can walk about a subject, you can walk in interior, exterior spaces, object capture. There's lots of different methods. But from this myriad of images that you'll get, computer vision algorithms will help you identify what these common features are, shoot rays out from the camera, and where they intersect, that becomes what's called the tie point, or kind of a common reference. And as you generate, processing-wise, a tremendous amount of these, that can end up becoming a 3D mesh or vertexes of a polygonal mesh. And then the software takes the images and it aggregates them on an importance level. So what commonly faces, or what is most perpendicular to the camera that shot it, will be kind of favored, and the ones that are way off to the side. So for this area, this camera would be favored. This would contribute some pixels, but be of lesser importance. So what you can get is, and this is the beauty of photogrammetry, you get fairly accurate scanning or recreation of surfaces, but you get a tremendous amount of textural detail, what we call texel detail. And that is what really makes it a persuasive thing. Anyway, let me keep going because I don't want to slow down here. This is one of our first very early photogrammetry pieces we applied to full dome. And again, this is for the Morrison. Ken knows all about this show. This is the earthquake show, I think, several years ago. And to be honest, I'm a little foggy as to what app we used for this, but this was a pretty elaborate shoot that we did in the Ferry Building in San Francisco, and then got what we thought, which I think still generally holds up, was a pretty decent result that was applicable for the resolution inherent in full dome. So this showed us a great opportunity to use this as a production tool in full dome. Now, this is just a survey of different techniques that we use. And this is kind of going from the macro to the celestial, if you will. And this was a device that we helped develop with a friend of ours called the GigaMacro. And this is using a CNC gantry with a camera with a 65 millimeter kind of macroscopic or really microscopic lens. And the idea here was that we could create, using depth maps and reconstruction, we could create models of very, very small things with photogrammetry. And then, in a sense, and then moving up from there, gigapixel is, of course, a great backbone for raster imagery. And then we would go, and this is where photogrammetry kind of lives mostly, is terrain-based. So again, here's Greg with a carbon pole with a camera. We're shooting the Mono Lake Tufa. This was actually a project for Autodesk where they asked us to compare the efficacy or kind of the accuracy of photogrammetry against laser scanning. And we found that it was, nearly identical between the two. So the accuracy of photogrammetry as a scanning method has become very, very great. Of course, we'll shoot spherical panoramas in the background there to go along with, and so forth. But in any case, a lot of this can just be terrestrial, on your feet type of capture. Carbon pole is a great way to, and this is a pretty tall pole. This is made for photogram. This will extend up to about 16, 18 feet. And I think, let me move one thing over. Okay. So this is can be useful for locations that drones are not allowed. And of course, we'll move up from there to drone capture, which is very common now for GIS or terrains. But very frequently we'll charter either a fixed wing or a helicopter, ideally, in different locations. And I do this quite frequently. And we'll remove the doors from say a Robertson helicopter, and then be able to do pretty significant captures of large-scale terrains. And I've turned this into gliding experience, kind of a hang gliding simulation in my product. But in any case, and then if you go up to the largest extent, you can use GIS data that sources either from the shuttle or from satellite data, and there's some pretty rich opportunities as far as capturing the Earth at a larger scale. So we're trying to cover it from the very minute to the very large. Okay, let me keep going. And let's see what's up next. This is a case study. This is one of, I think, our most pleasurable and successful photogrammetry captures. This was done for a cultural heritage site in China on the Silk Road. And there's a foundation that Mimi Gates, Bill Gates' stepmother, runs in Seattle called the Dunhuang Foundation. And they offered to have us come out and capture several of these caves. And these are priceless antiquities. This is really a major cultural heritage site for the world. Few Americans know about it. We certainly didn't know about it as we were approached on this. But what a wonderful location to visit if you are up for traveling to the Gobi Desert. But this is a pretty faithful reconstruction of one of the most ancient caves there, and you can see a Tibetan influence. And these is kind of an interesting mix of influences on the Silk Road, which is the nature of the Silk Road, this intercultural highway, as it were. But the idea behind this was to take this into virtual reality, which we've done. But this is just showing you some examples. And here, if we look at this, it feels very photographic. But in fact, it's 3D modeling throughout. We were talking, I think Ken was mentioning, or was it Kachun was mentioning how you can go places in VR. And the funny thing about this piece is you can stand in VR on this ledge and get a very unique view of the reclining Buddha here. And it's something that would not only be frowned upon, but you would probably end up in some type of prison, I imagine, if you did this there. So this is kind of one of the really interesting things that you can do in our VR experience, is experience these caves in a very unique way. Let me keep going. So this led to another big pivot for me about, I don't know, maybe 8 years ago. And I really wanted to bring this to the public and be able to share these locations. What you're seeing here are snapshots of locations that have all been scanned. These are all 3D renderings of these different locations. And so these are just a few examples. This shows kind of a rough geometry, but then coupled with that texel detail, the texture detail I talked about, you can just get incredible photorealism. And these are just different sites that I've been excited to visit. Obviously, Carlsbad, as Kachun had mentioned. And then a different call. I'm a big rock art I love to study rock art in its different incarnations. This is one outside of Bishop, California, which faces the sky, called Sky Rock. And again, some of these are very fragile sites. Some are culturally sensitive. And again, to be able to show these in context in a VR headset or in full dome is a really wonderful thing. This is a very, very esoteric location that generally is off limits, but we work with the Navajo Nation and they allow access. And we tell the story of this particular canyon in Arizona. And this has been an ongoing project, which has, again, been just a joy to shoot. And then I'm currently involved with a Buddhist group in the Bay Area, and we're in the process of scanning a number of temples in Southeast Asia. So I'm heading over to India and Cambodia soon to continue this work. This is the first one we captured in Bodh Gaya, India. And this is to provide virtual pilgrimage to the Buddhist community. But I would love to take this into Full Dome too, and have intention to. But this is the product that I have released. It's out on the Meta Quest. And I just took this year, ported it over to the Apple Vision Pro, which is just a stunning thing. If any of you in the audience, I'll offer it to you. If you have access to this headset, please email me. I can send you some download codes for these. And it's just a stunning thing. Or if you have a Quest, I'm happy to give you a code for that too. And you can take a look at this. I'm just going to only have 2 minutes left, so I'm just going to scrub through these 3 examples of what you can experience in the headset. These are pre-rendered in Maya. This is a cave title. This is some of the temples that have been captured. These are all photogrammetric models. This is how it feels in the headset. This is some hang gliding. And in the AVP, you can just use your hands and fingers to fly, which is a really exhilarating thing. And just to feel the spatial aspect of these sites is really something spectacular. This is an ancient bristlecone you can actually climb, which you would never do in real life. These are some of the native sites that are just remarkable to experience. So I think I'm just about out of time. So what I'm going to lastly do is just mention this. This is a art project. One thing I've noticed about photogrammetry, nobody's used it artistically. This is a film I'm just finishing up. I'm going to be entering in Dome festivals around the world. This is influenced by Jerry Ullsman, who is one of the early pioneers of composited photography, and but applying this to photogrammetry. And what I'm doing here is I'm rendering out at 16K square to be able to take it out to Apple, to conventional full dome, to vertical full dome like Cosm, and then also to giant screen. And this is a specialty immersive format called the Cinechamber in San Francisco that I'll be debuting it in. Lastly, very quickly, email me and I can give you the link, or you can search Autodesk University with my last name, and you can get a class that I put together a few years ago on how to do this. And I'm just going to tap through this rapid fire. And there's also a talk that goes with this on how to perform photogrammetry. So I can give you a lot of tips and clues from this. And one last thing, I'm just coming up, is this is the future of all this. And this is a new method using AI-derived neural learning. This is called NERF, N-E-R-F, neural radiance field, not the toy. And there's also a thing called Gaussian splatting. I don't have the time to go into this, but we could talk about this in Q&A. But as Ken pointed out, these are great little phone apps that you can easily get started with photogrammetry. I use a package called Reality Capture, which is kind of the most, I think, accurate package to use. And Epic Games bought it and offers it for free, so you don't have to spend the $3,000 on the license I did a few years ago. So anyway, that's it. There's my email, and please feel free to reach out. I can ask any or answer any questions.
Thank you, Eric. That was super, super great, and so many resources. I think it's great for our community, especially, you know, at the moment when we need to re-engage with science and culture and, you know, parse things out and agree on on reality, really. So we have a few questions. The first one, Ken kind of answered it. A question from Paris. By photogrammetry, are you talking about 3D scan or a combination of many photographs stitched together? I think this was kind of addressed in one of your diagrams, Eric, where you talk about looking at the things from different angles? Do you
Yeah, I
wanna
think
explain?
Ken answered this as well in the chat, it looked like. But yes, indeed, it's just a method of an alternate to laser scanning. One thing that's worth mentioning is that all scanning techniques, laser scan, photogrammetry, splats, etc., they all have pros and cons. And you know, so it really is application dependent on what how you want to utilize these. If you're a 3D artist, I've been a 3D artist my whole life. It's second nature to use these apps. If you are new to 3D or don't work in that, commonly the phone apps, Polycam can be an easy entry point. But you know, it is getting easier for access. But generally speaking, it's kind of in the domain of a 3D artist and to utilize properly. But it's yeah, it's great. It's just a simple camera, and cell phones are even getting decent enough to, obviously through Polycam, to give you a good result. But again, laser scanning is always useful for the built environment. So anytime I do a capture of, as you can tell, most of my VR product is natural scenes, which is riddled with fine detail or kind of features. But if you go to blank plaster surfaces or any type of repetitive or reflective surfaces in an urban environment, you definitely have to have a laser scan. The beauty is these scanning techniques, well, at least laser scanning and photogrammetry live together. Reality capture accepts both, processes both. The merging of polygonal models with these new AI techniques is yet to be refined, but it's starting. So anyway, and the other thing about the new techniques, they'll do fine detail, reflective surfaces, optical effects that photogrammetry just doesn't have. Photogrammetry, the big limitation is it can't, you'll reach a topology limit very quickly with the complexity of nature. So foliage is very tough. Fine hair technique, humans are tough. Things like that. And these new techniques will overcome all that. So anyway, hope that answers it.
I think you mentioned this just now, but does it combine with LiDAR scans kind of thing, or is that not necessary?
Yeah. Like I say, they're each good for different things, and I commonly combine them. And you want to combine them for again, man-made subjects. But nature, I've found, oh, well, my dirty secret actually in this work is I commonly do desert scenes because I don't have a lot of plants. If I lived in the Northwest like I used to, wouldn't be quite as useful. I'd be looking at these new techniques.
Yep. Well, you like to look at the slow time. You know, rocks move, but very slowly.
Yeah, of course. That's right.
Oh, Dario just asked if there's an easy and standardized way to move this to things like Unity, and I think that's what we did in 2016 on my class. You know, we moved these models to Unity, fairly easy. But I don't know what if you have experience with that. You have some advice?
I'll just say really quickly, all my work is in Unity, but for what I do in VR, I pre-render for the dome. But Kachun, why don't you pick that up and talk about OpenSpace? Because you took the models that I created and are showing them in real time.
Yes. So the movies that you saw in my presentation were actually captured from OpenSpace, and that's the software that we use in our dome. And I don't have enough experience with other visualization packages out there to know how easy it is to import models. But for OpenSpace, it was relatively simple, just because OpenSpace does have an API to load a variety of model types. And so the biggest barrier for us was actually to simplify the models. So I worked with Eric to, and I think, Eric, you were using Maya to reduce the model sizes. So the typical models that we were using had about 1 million polygons for us to be able to interact with them in the dome in real time. And as technology gets better, obviously you'll be able to use more complex or more detailed models. But what you lose in the polygons, even though you lose some of the geometry, a lot of that is still embedded in the textures. So as long as you have really high quality textures, the audience often won't even notice that your geometry is not as detailed as it can be.
Mm-hmm.
So Alan is asking if can anyone say anything about the skyscape work using Stellarium, and what would be similar or different from the photogrammetry here?
I don't know anything about that, unfortunately.
Yeah, I'm not familiar.
I know about Stellarium. I'm not sure I know what Skyscape is. Maybe Ellen can clarify.
Yeah, if Alan can clarify, and we can go a little. I do have a question. Has something like photogrammetry be done in like other planets, like any mission?
That's for
Actually, I
Ken,
have
right?
worked on projects involving the Martian surface. And so I actually had students working on data from some of the Mars satellites. And some of those scans or images were intentionally taken of the same area, but with different view angles. And so there are programs that programs that software programs, but programs in place where people go about to reconstruct 3D models or more detailed 3D models of the surface using basically photogrammetry techniques. And so some of the that work is the pipeline is standardized enough that it still took some effort, but I actually had some high school students work on a few select places. So that is indeed possible if you have the imagery. And Mars is one of the few places in our solar system where there's huge amounts of imagery where you can do that.
And I think someone asked if there was if you have experience that you need to touch up the models, like paint over, or do people still do that after you capture them through photogrammetry?
Yeah, I guess I'll touch on that. There's to truly capture the extent of reality is a daunting thing. So what I'll do is when I first arrive at a location for capture, I'll decide what I want the experience to be, and then kind of shoot for that experience. I don't kind of make it a mindless kind of million monkeys in front of a typewriter shooting kind of thing. But so it is kind of strategic, but at the same time, there's always going to be areas unseen or occluded that need to be either touched up or finished out. Like I think Kachin showed that you showed the view from the back of the model, which you would generally never do. But that was true. I mean, Carlsbad was strictly from the walkway, which of course was limiting. But again, for that terrestrial point of view of being a standard human being walking down the path, it was perfect. But what was I going to say here is that, there is an issue of repair. There is the issue of veracity and accuracy. Do you want to take liberties on reality by, doing some paint work, or even geometric infill? AI is obviously raising that issue. There's been several bits of work. None of it's really made its public debut in an application, but ways to kind of use AI to infill photogrammetry or texturing. And that'll be great for visualization. It won't be of any use for scientific data. But again, and that is an ongoing issue. Photogrammetry is an accurate simulacrum of the world, but at the same time, the issue of accuracy does play in. Generally not a problem, but again, in the way that scale is represented in a headset is a constant kind of challenge for me, or decision that I make that's kind of empirical. But there is repair, because this technique hides imperfections. If something looks perfect, it's still kind of hiding a ton of things that you can't really pick up.
Thank you. Yes. So Rosemary just complimented her question about the skyscapes. She says they're used to present 3D models of cultural sites of interest for archaeoastronomy sites. So, so anybody want to answer that? I mean, I would just say, as long as the format is the one that the program would accept, it would work, but I'm not familiar further.
Yeah, I do a lot of archaeoastronomy work, and there's a big dome project that is, I think, I imagine it's in the dome by now, but it was with Duke Johnson at the Clark, and also University of Colorado, with a couple PIs there, and it was Chaco Canyon driven. And so we did a major capture of a site there, then showed the recreation, the mechanism of the astroarc or archaeoastronomy in the end through Unreal Engine in real time in the dome, and that's through Duke's team at the Clark. But yeah, they've made a great little flat video of that piece that's available. I'm not aware of if it's in play yet or released yet in the dome. But yeah, it's fantastic for that. I'm not familiar with skyscapes, so I'll have to look that up. But yeah, certainly, and this is one thing I'd like to do more and more of, is be able to show these kind of concepts as a animated mechanism based on photogrammetry, which is a great opportunity too.
Yes, someone was just asking about if photogrammetry can be animated, and I think that's in Ken's turf.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I would say as an animator, I would say no. Not without some additional work. The mesh you're going to get is this extremely dense triangulated mesh, which is not optimized for animation. And so you could animate it, but it would be an absolute nightmare. I have gone through a process of the other issue you run into is that the UVs are also not optimized for anything except for keeping them the way that they are, basically. And so so what you need to do, or what you can do, is this similarly it's a similar process to if you were sculpting something in ZBrush or Blender, where you're usually the sculpting process is just using a voxel mesh, and then once you've gotten the shape, the detailed shape that you want, you then go through and retopologize it to get a proper edge flow so that you can deform it and also create UVs that would make sense that you could then paint on. And I have been able to take a photogrammetric model. I did this in ZBrush. You could probably do it in Blender, but you basically can transfer if you up the point count enough, you can take the color data from the points and reproject it onto a retopologized mesh where you've created a nice set of UVs. So it is possible to go from a photogrammetric model to a new model that you've recreated for animation, I would say. But it is a process, and it's a little bit you kind of have to know how to do it. But right out of the gate, animating a photogrammetric model would probably be quite a pain.
Yeah, because what you're saying is that when you refer to UVs, you are saying these groups of points in the polygonal mesh, to which you can add weights and then grab them and move them together, right? So kind of.
Yeah. Well, with the UVs, it's the way that the texture is essentially draped around the 3D object. And with photogrammetry, it does it in some way where it's all these like little strange islands that don't seem to have a rhyme or reason. Whereas if you were to create an object traditionally, you would create it with a very specific UV set that you could then paint on and use symmetry and all these things. And the same thing with, when you're weighting the model for deformations, having the lowest count possible allows you to animate in real time, which allows you to capture realistic motion. Otherwise, it's just you're not going to get anywhere fast. So
yeah. On that note, that is an excellent reason to team up with your local artists, right? And learn together.
Can I do one amend to that, which is there's a lot in development right now. This is that area that we're talking about is called volumetric capture. And there's been stages here in LA and other cities that offer that. And it's basically a grid of cameras in using video capture and doing frame by frame photogrammetry for human performance. But and it's developed fairly well, but now there's new techniques with Gaussian splats. A friend of mine is in a stealth company, and that is getting very, very promising. So I think that will offer some great opportunities for placing human subjects in full dome productions within photogrammetric environments or any 3D environment. That'll be very, very compelling. So, we're on the cusp of a big kind of advance here with splats and AI as it applies to this technique. But yeah, there's some super exciting things going on with that now that'll change it. One thing that hasn't been mentioned yet is splats and nerfs are not polygons. They're this, and you saw these strange kind of shard-like artifacts, what Ken was showing, and it's image based. So it's actually kind of data based. So it's nothing like we've ever had tools to deal with before. So it's like a new kid on the block that's, came from somewhere else. And so there's no tool sets for it quite yet, or it's evolving, it's emerging. But it's going to change everything in the next few years, for sure.
Yeah, there was a question earlier about somebody asked about how to get from a splat to a model. And what I was going to say is that they're kind of two different things in a sense. Like usually with photogrammetry under the hood, it's creating this point cloud, which has location and color data, and then it's creating a mesh around that. Whereas the splat is kind of like a advanced point cloud in a sense that is meant to basically stay as a point cloud because it has all these additional attributes on there like scale and opacity that when they are layered together, they create this realistic image. But it can't quite then be like remeshed in a way that translates. So it's sort of like they could be really good for creating environments. But if you were to talk about a traditional workflow where you're trying to create an object and then animate it or something, it doesn't quite translate in the way that you would think. It is evolving constantly. So.
Very cool. Dan has a question. Eric, with your travels capturing these unique locations, is there any thought to recording multi-channel audio in these spaces? Recording audio in a photogrammetry style is an ideal way to capture these unique soundscapes.
Yeah, totally agreed. I shoot ambisonic audio every location that I shoot at. Well, not all of them, but many. My shortcoming there is I'm so busy with the visual, I don't really, ever give audio proper justice. But it is a big aspect, either in full dome or VR. And in a simplistic way, Zoom makes a very inexpensive ambisonic 4-track that's about, I don't know, $250. And it's very easy to carry along with you versus a field recorder, what I used to use. But anyway, yeah, that I definitely audio. It just for me, I need to work with an audio specialist because I'm just too busy doing the visual. But I don't know, Ken. I mean, how do you handle audio at Morrison? Actually, that's a good question for you too.
When we a couple years ago, we were shooting on location down in Chile at all these observatories down there, and we brought I can't remember the name of it, but it was a spatialized audio microphone, and we put it next to the camera every time, and that gave our sound designer the ability to place us right in the environment. And I agree with Tammy that nobody gives audio the proper justice. It is totally 50% of the show. Like it's so important. And so, anytime I can't remember we had I'll have to look up the name of the microphone that we were using, but it was really nice. And so, absolutely.
Well, with this, I want to thank you all for, jumping in today's iMERSA Day and sharing your expertise. And I'm going to give the podium to Michael back. But again, thank you so very much. This has been great. And we're going to do a couple more things that Michael will tell us.
Thanks so much, Julieta. That was really wonderful. And I have to remove your spotlight or nobody will see me. Hang on. What's going on? There it is. You gotta love Zoom. Okay. So Thanks, everybody. This was really informative. And when we first started having the conversation offline before we started, I was like, I know they're speaking English, but I don't really understand what they're saying. But I understand it a lot better now, and it's really fascinating. And just to imagine how this technology could be used in so many different disciplines, not just immersive entertainment, but in research, like Ken had mentioned, and other types of ways of seeing things that you could never have access to, like that nest at the top of Carlsbad, or looking at the perspective of the reclining Buddha, things that you just haven't imagined before. I think that's really pretty spectacular. So what we're going to do is we're going to transition into a social time, but before we do that, I wanted to introduce Dan Nafis, our president, to say a few words and close things out for us. So Dan, go for it.
Oh, very good, Michael. Thank you. And indeed, a thanks to all of you. Many friends not only attending, but participating in this. I think Eric and Ken and Kachin, we all go back decades plus in experimenting with creating magical experiences for the audiences, focused primarily on the dome. And the more realistic the experience, probably the more engaging it is. Particularly enthusiastic as Julieta was about the importance of localizing stories, community experiences, taking people to places they couldn't go otherwise with experts. And the key to that is indeed these visualization and audience tools that, as Eric mentioned, are exploding around us and becoming so much more accessible. So to me, and the challenge to all of our participants today, is how we improve and enhance and expand and share this programming in both our dome and VR environments. Hopefully there'll be continuing discussion about that, and that's where we're going to take this session next. So indeed, thanks to all of you for joining in and participating today. We're going to keep online for another half hour or so and just open this up to more casual conversations. With that, nothing too formal or technical about it. Michael, maybe you can make people live and we can go ahead and do kind of an interactive discussion. Thanks again, everybody, for joining in, and I look forward to continuing our chat.
Absolutely. So everybody should be able to unmute and turn on your cameras now if you want to just chat with everybody. Really great session, guys. Thank you so much.
And at risk of it being a free-for-all, go, Glenn.
Go ahead, Glenn.
Sorry, I was just doing a little humor there. Very little humor.
That's basically my benchmark. So there you go.
Anyway, good to see everybody. It was really interesting presentations this evening. I'm glad I had time to tune in.
Yeah, thanks for joining us.
And as I was commenting, it's cool to have, I mean, first of all, these things are all happening. It appears to be in archive quality. I mean, the resolutions are really high and everything, and that's great because it'll last a long time. It's not something that'll have to be redone in 2 or 3 years because it's hitting boundaries of resolution and stuff like that. It seems to be really in a somewhat archive quality for now. So hopefully we can enjoy the results of this work for years to come. But then the next question is, where can you experience the results of this work in a form that's fitting for the raw material? So domes, of course, that's what we're all about, I guess, immersive environments. And we just have to keep pushing the boundaries of what we can achieve in those things. The headsets seem to be always limited to the resolution of the little LCD panels in the headset. So I think domes still offer the best way to experience stuff like this. And especially the group experience is always much better because humans are social animals and tend to experience things better as a group than as an individual. So I think this all plays in the direction that we all work together on.
Yeah. Yeah, Glenn, and what you're saying, like my evil plan on this is like it inspires domes to, people in their own domes to take ownership of the place where they live in the planet. To say, oh my God, this place, because usually when you go somewhere, you go with a couple people, unless you go to like a big spectacle, right? But all these natural places, it's very few people that you are sharing the experience with. And the power of magnifying this in the dome and say, this is data about our place where we are right now. It's almost like a Zen experience, right? But
Or even where we were, I mean, some of these archaeological sites, which are decaying at a alarming rate, that we can capture now and be able to enjoy them in the future. I mean, that's really amazing there. I think that's really a great application alone for that.
Yeah. Well, when I was here in 2016, it was before the one of the biggest eruptions, and this beautiful area Waiopae / Kapoho in the Big Island, it got covered with 8 feet of lava. And for me and for the people I work with, more so than me, because I'm not a Hawaiian, but it was like losing a very dear friend. So it was
like
that.
in Afghanistan when the big Buddha statues were all destroyed by the Taliban, in a moment of whatever the reason was. But imagine those had been scanned and in photogrammetry and preserved. At least we could have had them to enjoy still today. So I think there's almost an urgent need to identify sites and places to archive now. It doesn't hurt to have them, even if you don't need it at the moment, at least to get it captured and saved before it degrades either from environmental or other elements that can destroy it.
So I know this may be a can of worms, but I'm curious to know, because I don't think we touched on this. What does the chasm look like bridging from doing something in photogrammetry that has to be rendered out in Maya or Unity to something that actually can be played back in real time? Is that an easy path? Is that a hard path? What happens to the quality of the experience? What do you think?
I actually want to jump in there too and ask Kachin to describe how he's been using that and the tools with open space. So I have the same question there, Michael.
Yeah, I touched upon this a little bit earlier, but I think Eric, a lot of the models that you were outputting from your pipeline had on the order of about 10 million polygons, and so that was a little bit too much for our dome. And so I actually had to rely on you. I didn't have the tools to downgrade the resolution. And and you can jump in as well, but I believe you're using Maya. So there were additional steps that were required to simplify the models in order for them to play nicely in a real-time system.
Yeah, I mean, using reality capture, it will the beauty of that package, unlike many others, is that it'll create billions of polygons as your base solve, so that you'll get in the end something that you can't. There's no system that can display that level of resolution, but it's actually created it. And then what you need to do though is take it down to whatever output ramification is appropriate for your project. So in your case, for open space, I'm not familiar with it, but that'll have a certain limitation, just like, a headset will, a gaming platform, et cetera, will. But the one trick that I came across early, well, not even trick, but realization, is that if you take lighting calculation out of the equation, and you're just simply processing polygons and texture, it lightens the real-time load tremendously. So as a result, photogrammetry, you don't want to relight it. Now, I was looking in what you were showing. I think we should talk about this offline sometime, but you generally don't want to light an existing natural lighting. I think we did talk about this one time. But there are cases, I think you were focusing, you put like a spotlight in certain areas. So there's a use case for that, for sure, to direct attention. But generally speaking, you know, all my shading is what's called unlit. So it's super dumb and super lightweight. It's not doing any lighting calculation whatsoever. And that's the way that I can take those resources, computing resources, and do more with geometry and texture and relieve it of doing the lighting calculation. Now in virtual production, this you know, new domain in film where we're all, you know, shooting film on LED walls, any director of photography is going to want to relight. He's not going to say, oh, I'm stuck to the lighting that it was shot in. I want to create lighting, right? So that's a whole different domain, and that's a big challenge for a real-time engine. But Unreal Engine is kind of up to that task with a lot of the tools that the tech that they have. But generally speaking, for the dome, yeah, like I say, I'm not familiar with open. Is it open world? Open space. Yeah, but
yeah, and we were degrading down to about 1 million polygons as kind of a max.
Yeah, that sounds about right. But anyway, yeah, no, it's, I mean, the bottom line is, again, reality is the one thing about photogrammetry. I think actually, who was it? The old VR pioneer, Jaron Lanier, years and years ago, mentioned how and this is when VR was primitive, that working in VR gave him a new appreciation of the complexity of the world. And that's even though now we can still reach levels that he wasn't working at, it still gives you a rich appreciation, because you go, wow, it's just, there's just infinite detail everywhere, and light, you know, and just, you know, extraordinary phenomena. So that's one of the interesting things about it. But as a result of that, you can't get it all. So you have to, you know, always optimize to your case, you know, case study.
And although, you know, we've been extolling the virtues of photogrammetry and the results that it can give, you know, in our presentations in the Dome, we always tell the audiences, you know, these are places that you can experience. I mean, most of the time, we're showing them places that they can visit for themselves. And if you do visit Carlsbad and you compare the photogrammetric models to what you actually see when you're there, there's really no comparison, because reality, as Eric says, is far more complex, it's far more beautiful, and it's far more compelling than the simulation. And so I think the photogrammetry can definitely entice your audience. It can pull them in to get them immersed in these very compelling stories. It can help large audiences visit places that would be difficult for them to go. But oftentimes in the end, you really do want people to experience it for themselves, if it is possible for them to do that.
I think we always have to keep the story there as well. I mean, capturing all this stuff is one thing, but when you experiencing it or displaying it, there needs to really to be a story with it. Even when you visit Carlsbad as a person, there's a tour guide, or there's signs that explain parts as you go, and just having all the stuff in front of you and be able to look in every direction is one thing, but making a story out of it is what really makes it meaningful, and brings it all together. And the story should always be right next to you as you're developing the materials, I think.
And there are stories
right.
that have developed, you know, over time by communities, right? I mean, when we talk about culture and cultural sites, sometimes we assign, you know, otherworldly reasons for these things having been made. But there are very concrete demonstrations of communities connecting to the planet, to their environment. And here in Hawaii, if I can just share a little thing. But when you go down to a chain of craters, there and different parts of the island, there are holes in the lava or in the ground. And what happens is that when a baby is born, the umbilical cord is buried in a significant location. So the child will grow up connected to the place, to the environment. And that is quite powerful. When I learned about it, it gave me the chills, right? Because you see that there is, more environmentalist, opposite to individualistic, like human, but connecting to a place that it can be, well, it is very powerful. I wanted to share that with you.
Yeah, and jumping off of Glenn's point, that's kind of the reason why we wanted to have a speaker who was connected to the Park Service, who had done research in Carlsbad. And one of the stories that she told was about, what the experience of trying to get up to the spirit world was like. And I only really lightly touched upon it, but you can imagine, these group of people back in the mid 80s, launching these balloons with lines up 200 feet into the air, and having the lightest guy kind of, jumping on the line and tugging on it to make sure that it was secure, and that it wouldn't, whatever they had blindly kind of secured, the rock structure wouldn't suddenly break off. So that's, just a very compelling story to learn about this phase of exploration of these caverns. And we can use these visualizations to help tell these amazing stories. And I've even done some research in the past where we've contacted and interviewed members of our audience and asked them, we can fly around in the planetarium and explore the surface of the Earth. And you can do the same thing in Google Earth at home. So why would you spend the money, spend the time to come to the planetarium to see this? And, I think pretty much everyone basically said that if they were doing the same sort of exploration at home, they wouldn't have the stories that we were telling them. I mean, they could see all these things, but they wouldn't know what they were looking at and what they were supposed to learn from looking at these visuals. And so having presenters, having a narrative track, having these stories helps provide the context. And these, and these are critically important for engaging audiences. Like Glenn said, you can only, you can't go so far just with the pretty visuals. And in the end, you really have to have something a little bit more compelling to keep, people riveted in their seats and to come back.
Well, let me say, as an educator, it is a constant issue of trying to redirect the student back to the story. And, it's the story stupid is the old, saying, but it's, and these days in our film school, and probably most, there's so much going on with virtual production now. Generally, film students who are not technical are rushing headlong into Unreal Engine. And the beauty about that is they can buy existing buyout worlds and so forth, and they can kind of do a lot without the technical knowledge that being a Maya or even a Blender artist may require. But again, they kind of lose sight of the forest through the trees, and they just get involved. And I see it over and over again, where they just get too involved with learning UE and they forget about storytelling. And I spend weeks talking about narrative and immersive media and lecturing on all that. And I always have to remind them, what do we talk about at the beginning? And, so always face back to story. So yeah, totally agreed. One thing, by the way, I was going to mention, Kachun, you probably don't know the story, but when I shot Carlsbad the first time, or maybe it was the time I shot it for you, I was with a friend of mine who's very experienced Southwest, an older friend of mine who's very experienced in the Southwest. And he had traveled all through the Yucatan and so forth, and very knowledgeable photographer. But in any case, so as I went to the back of the big room, it gets very dark back there. They don't light it as extensively. And I got a very strong sense of something not sinister but powerful, and in that dark region. And the volume of the big room is so unbelievable spatially. And it just, to me, Carlsbad represents a very, very powerful spiritual place that's been fashioned into a national park for tourists. And so I think there's much more power there than people may realize. because it's, they have, the little lunch spot down there. They've kind of commercialized it, but in fact, it's a terrifying place in a way. And that's what I told my friend. I said, I feel a sense of terror, not like abject fear, but like this strong sense of something here. And he goes, "Oh, you're just feeling Sepulba, the god of the underworld." And I went, "Really?" Well, and I totally believe him, because, that there is a presence and a power in that cave that is a story, right? And this is the thing. This is one reason I love cultural heritage, because, like, working with the Navajo Nation, they look at the desert Southwest landscape as story. It's all meaningful. It's not just a mesa. It's like, story is integral to landscape, with many cultures. And so, yeah, I'm always trying to figure out story, first and foremost.
And actually, that brings back to another point, is that, people who, there's a lot of evidence, for instance, that their Native Americans have known about Carlsbad, long before European Americans did, just because of evidence that people have found in the caves. And, nowadays, like you say, it's turned into a tourist spot. It's really, not quite Disneyfied, but, it's made to be very accessible. There are guardrails everywhere, which you took out of the models, so you don't actually see guardrails in the movies, the animations that I showed. But if you think about what the experience of the early explorers are like, even what was it, Jim White, who was the first modern American to visit. They didn't have lighting that would light up the entire cave. They had torches, they had small lamps. And so as you were exploring, you really only saw, structures that were immediately around you or in front of you or wherever you were shining your light. And so the experience of the first explorers to go in there, or for people who didn't have modern lighting technology, was radically different. And it's very, different than what we're showing in our drone. But, that's not to say that we can't try to replicate that experience as well. And so, I can definitely understand, this idea of feeling just a sense of terror of being in, this underground space where there's just pitch darkness and black, off in the distance that,
you may
goes off
not,
into infinity.
you may not know this story either, but we got a special permit for this with the park. And of course, I met that geologist. I think you worked with her too. I forget her name, but
Yeah, it was Aaron Lynch, right?
I think so. But she took me down the elevator after closing to let me do, a shoot all on my own there, which was fabulous. And but I assumed all the lighting would still be on. But as we got off the elevator, the thing was pitch dark, and we had to walk out a little ways into the big room to find the breaker box for all the lights. And it was an extraordinary experience to feel that space pitch dark. It was actually the best part of that experience. And I was just like, wow. And then to see her hit the breakers and one big section would light up and then another big section, it was like, oh my God, that was worth all the effort right there just to see that. So yeah, there's a greater story of Carlsbad than people know. I'm convinced. I mean, it's, for the public, it's a tremendous story of science, but there's like something that's deeper there that I just found fascinating.
You got to experience it like
it
a
also
bat.
Pardon me? But what,
You
Glenn?
got to experience it like a bat.
Yeah. Well, that would be another great way to experience it. Actually, that's a great idea. That's a great idea. That'd be really fun. You'd have to capture a lot more.
And if you also think about this, this sort of experience actually goes back many tens of thousands of years. The caves and the cave art in Europe. That's and all of the paintings that many of us are familiar with, Lascaux and other places. If you think about today, you can see you can either visit them or see recreations of them or see pictures of them in books. But again, those are all brilliantly lit, safely lit, so that they not degrading the artwork. But if you imagine what it must have been like for those early humans to go in there, with very primitive lighting, they're going hundreds of meters into these caves where there's no natural light at all. So it's a completely pitch black experience. And you can't, see where you're walking unless you take whatever torch you have to light your path.
Yeah, and like Lacan and all the great cave art, was designed to be animated by the firelight, right?
Exactly.
So yeah, there's a history of that too.
Well,
Yeah, so I think there's definitely this deeper element of mystery in caves that we're kind of just really barely scratching the surface of, and I don't think anyone has tried to really replicate that experience for a modern audience, and it'd be interesting to see what.
There's a VR title that's really quite good on that. I think it's Lacan, maybe another one, but it's beautifully done. It's called the Birth of Art or something like that, but could easily be adapted to full dome. And that's one thing that getting back involved in dome now, it's like the VR community doesn't always know the dome community exists, and kind of vice versa. I mean, I think we realize VR more than VR realizes domes. And there's a lot of content that can fluidly go between.
Well, I also wanted to go back to the bat idea, because animals experience the world very different to humans. So for a bat, being in the cave is a totally different experience, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to mention that at UIC, there was a collaboration with people at University of Texas years ago to send this submersible to Jupiter's moon, Io, which is underwater, totally dark. So the way the environment was going to be scanned was like a bat,
Yeah, sonically.
Sonically. So then they could do these 3D models, and actually they did tests in Lake Bonny in Antarctica, and also in Wisconsin in some lake there. So it is an experience that is also different, right? Like you can take people to these environments and have them experience in a way that other creatures on the planet will experience them, which is, a kind of interesting empathic exercise.
I'd like to chime in on that a little bit too, just based on when we're talking about story. Story doesn't necessarily have to be narration, right? Story doesn't necessarily even have to be music, right? I mean, I think we're wanting people to experience, and if we're wanting people to experience places, I go back to talking about location recording, and my style has always been sort of in that same way that you're doing with photographs, is that yes, I'll record with an ambisonic microphones, I'll record with binaural microphones, but also many mono microphones, which is like a photograph, and then bringing them all back to create the soundscape. And I think if we look at story as an immersive with immersive storytelling, having people in the space almost creating their own story and not being constantly led, I think is what I try and do in my projects.
Tim, I've got a good friend, Kevin Mack. He's a Academy Award-winning VFX guy, but he does a lot of VR things. He does a lot of abstract art, and pretty remarkable work, but very abstract. But he was kind of the darling of the VR panel speaking series for a long time, but he got kind of banished or blacklisted because he has this theory, and we expound on this a lot, is that his theory is that immersion is contrary to narrative. Like, in other words, it's experiential. It's not, didactic, where the story is delivered to you and you're expected to go with it. It's more your personal journey and your interpretation, not a writer's,
100%.
So we talk about this because my work is that way. I just leave it up to the viewer to appreciate these locations, and I give them, a little bit of background, but mostly I want them to have a deep connection, hopefully, in the headset. And his work is purely non-narrative, but it's extraordinary. But anyway, but yeah, that's another big story topic with immersive media, and it could easily apply to full dome as well. Totally. Obviously.
Well, and then there's the
experiential drop off, and where does narrative begin, and what's the proper amount of each.
Well, and then there's the other way of the many ways that may exist, which is to go and look at the place and then ask questions. And if there's an expert who can, feed your curiosity, the better. So it is a maybe not a storytelling, but an interaction, a dialogue, a construction, because the questions many times make the experts see new things. So
I think a lot of times in storytelling, we want the audience to think, right, as opposed to being fed, right? And I think and that's an art. It's an art in how you write, the story, but it's worth striving for.
Yeah, I tell my students I start the class off with I say there's 3 pillars of immersion. The first is spatial, because we all, want to convey space. That's kind of the medium, the currency that we use to engage. And then number 2 is mental immersion, and that could be plot driven or just kind of like story construct. It's the way you interpret what's happening. And then number 3 is emotional. And then if you have, and so I always ask my students at the end of the semester, do you have all 3 in there? Do you have spatial, mental and emotional? If you do, it's unstoppable. It's a powerful piece of work. And I mean, you could, I think you could probably apply that to film too, but it's like, you can't have something that's devoid of emotion or the intellectual or, what should I say, the physical, which is more spatial. But anyway, that's the way I look at it.
Cool. But going back to what you guys are talking about, one of the thoughts that I have always is it's not about the technology, it's not about the cool tools that you have in the palette, but it's what your intention is to do with them and how you're going to connect with the audience. And I think it's so easy to get that process eclipsed by all the cool toys that we can play with. But just like a piano has 88 keys, if you bang them all together, it's just noise. But if you use them in a musical way and select the right notes for the effect that you're trying to create, it's transcendent.
With silence here and there. Yep. Music doesn't exist without silence, right?
Absolutely.
100%. Yeah, I totally agree.
Tim, are you an audio artist, engineer? What I see is that Pro Tools back there, or what is that?
It's Nuendo. I'm an anti-Pro Tools guy.
Okay, gotcha.
But yeah, no, I've been doing soundscapes and large screen films for over 40 years now. So I'm out in the field recording as well as editing and mixing, and so dome theaters and IMAX theaters and the such.
Oh, love to chat with you offline.
Yeah, absolutely.
Projects for sure.
Yeah, for sure. It'd be fun.
We should craft something to display at Lowell on that cool screen.
Me and Glenn just got back from Arizona, and then that was actually my first time mixing to one of the LED screens, and I was always apprehensive because I wasn't like how perforated can they be compared to a real screen. That screen was amazing, Glenn. It blew me away, and the room sounded great. But yeah, it's when you look at those screens, that was my first time. You look at those screens and black is really black. It makes a huge difference.
We have 60 million pixels in 150-degree panorama, so it's ready for all your stuff.
Yeah, it looked great. The room sounded good, but it looked amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, a student of mine just did a piece for them, actually, some sci-viz piece, and I wasn't aware of it. She just showed this to me this week, and I was like, wow, I hadn't seen that format before. It's kind of a curious format, but yeah, Lowell, right? That panoramic with the inset at the top.
We call it the cat's eye up top, the piece up top. Yeah.
Is that a Skyscan install or what? Oh, it is. Oh, you're behind that. Oh, good.
Yeah. I'm trying not to be too commercial in these things, but okay, now that you ask.
Yeah, please. No, I hadn't seen that format. I thought it was really curious.
It's unique because at Lowell, it's the new Astronomy Discovery Center, and on the roof they have a open air planetarium, the Dark Sky Planetarium.
Oh, really?
So the planetarium without a dome, so they didn't want to have 2 planetariums, so they made a panoramic immersive theater down in the museum. But in the end, we went with LED and have altogether about 85 million pixels between the
Huh.
panorama and the ceiling screen. So it's really quite extraordinary.
So what's the horizontal res across the pano?
15K.
15. Wow, nice.
Yeah. So
Okay.
it's equivalent to about 17.5K in a dome.
Yeah, nice.
What's amazing about the LED panels is the black is so black that it almost creates a 3D effect where you see the object off the screen because black feels like it's infinitely far away from you. It's really kind of surprising and amazing.
Yeah.
And
I'm waiting for the personal LED domes I can have here at home.
It's coming. I'll bet it's coming.
Probably is. I always said I would love to have an aerosol spray of LED, organic LED. You just like spray it on any surface. And,
we can do a 4.5 meter dome with 4K resolution right now.
oh, can you? Okay.
That's about
Good
as
work.
tight as it gets with the bending and the LEDs and resolution. But yeah,
How much
Okay.
heat does that generate?
not much at all. The energy is expended as light, not as heat.
Okay.
So even though there's a lot of watts behind it all, it doesn't get that hot. It's kind of a hard concept to comprehend. It's kind of like also with sound, like where do all those watts go? Okay, the amplifiers get warm, but a lot of the energy is expended in the speakers and don't create that much heat.
Well, if you need a place to deploy it, let me know.
Okay, keep you in mind.
Same.
Yeah, in the meantime, I'll just have to make do with the Apple headset,
I actually
But-
have a question about that. Hi, Harry. This is Dario from
Hey.
Italy. I'm busy in
Oh, hey,
Europe.
Dario, how you doing? Yeah.
I'm right. It's been like more than 10 years since last time we met, I
Many
guess.
moons, many moons.
Yeah. I was very curious about that because we don't have, Apple doesn't sell the Apple Vision in Europe yet. And
Oh, really?
I've read reviews about, users, but I was wondering, from a perspective of a content creator, how does it work? Is it good enough for the full-on people to get in?
Oh, it's more than good enough. I'm a big fanboy, not of Apple, by the way, I gotta say, but of the headset, yes. And the reason why it's the display. It's all about the display. So human vision is 90 degrees pixel per degree. The Vive headset, maybe the Vive Pro might be 22. The Quest is a paltry like 16, 17. The Apple headset's 60. And it's not full HDR, but it's high dynamic range and it's organic LED. So it has all the beauty, the impact that, say, a digital dome would have, or an LED dome may have. But it's on your head. And yeah, it doesn't have there's obvious the usual VR limitations, but socially or what have you. But to me, it's been a revolutionary turning point this year. And I've been getting a little weary of VR after all these years, but this kind of like totally got me reinvigorated. No, I think it needs to be, and as a matter of fact, I've already got the Gates pano I shot, and I've got another flat level dome, the old Glendale dome, that I just am taking my art film and kind of matting it to and looking at it through the headset. So no, it's stunning. It is stunning, stunning.
Is that the same for the 3D environments as well? Just the
Yeah,
stereo?
I've got all my photogram on it, and it took a while for me to figure out how to make it sing. The problem with the display is it's too good. It makes you see any imperfection clearly, whether it's MPEG compression or photogrammetry artifacts or what have you. But I'll tell you, it's a visual. It's a stunning thing for anybody that practices in this media. It's like, wow, it's what we've always wanted. So yeah, well worth trying to get your hands on one. And yeah, spendy, but professionally, just look at it as a piece of gear, and it's great. There's not a way to monetize it quite yet. It's going to take a while, but still, it's been extraordinary for me this year.
Well, I hate
Thanks.
that guy to cut off the conversation, but it's almost 11 o'clock Pacific time, and that's our deadline. And I want to respect those like Dario who probably want to go to bed. So thank you so much for joining us today. We had a great time with this conversation. Please keep an eye out on our website and our Facebook page. And I put a link in the chat about the Full Dome Creative Network if you'd like to sign up for that. We'll have more events like this next year, I'm sure. And we wish you all a wonderful holiday season and look forward to seeing you in 2025. Thanks, everybody.
All right.
Thanks all. Take
everybody.
care.
All righty.
Good talking to you all.
Take care now.
Take
Thanks,
care, everyone.
everybody.